All right, hi there, everyone. Welcome to Lecture 21 on energy flow through ecological systems. And so, before we get started, I just want to again go over our spatial scales that we're covering here. So, where have we come from? Well, we started off looking at biochemistry and biomolecules, moving all the way up to the level of the cell. And then, if several cells start working together, we call those tissues, and we looked at tissues like muscle. Put tissues together and we call them organs. Put organs together, we call them organ systems, right? Things like the digestive system, things like the nervous system. And of late, we've moved up to the level of the individual. So I've been talking about whole body physiology, right? And now we're about to head into ecology world. And so we're going to be at the level of the individual or higher. So if you have many individuals of the same species that are interacting with each other and reproducing, you have a population. If you have many populations working together from different species, you have what's called a community. Communities are only the biological, only the biotic part of the equation, so just the organisms. If you, however, start looking at how these organisms interact with their physical and chemical environment, now we're talking about ecosystems. So ecosystems are the biotic part, the plants and the animals, and the abiotic, which is just everything in their environment. So that's an ecosystem. If we move up even larger, we have our biomes, and we've touched on this concept a little bit last day, where you have things like rainforest versus desert, right? There may be many locations of rainforest in the world, and there may be many locations of deserts in the world, but they have common characteristics, and so we call it a desert biome. We call it a rainforest biome. And if you scale up to the largest layer, we have the biosphere. So the biosphere is the region where biological activity is occurring. And it's not the entire planet, right? So you've got this planet as a sphere, but life is not occurring all the way to the core of the planet. It's only happening in this thin layer from the surface of the Earth down maybe 1.5 miles, right? Below the surface. Similarly, if you start at the surface of the Earth and go up into the atmosphere, life doesn't exist all the way up to the moon. It only exists in a thin layer about 11 miles thick. So the biosphere itself is just this thin layer that is covering the surface of our planet. So that's everything from biomolecules up to biosphere, and we are definitely in the region of the larger scales at this point. Okay, so we've looked at a lot of different biological processes at this point: photosynthesis, chemosynthesis, and definitely cellular respiration. Um, what we're talking about when we look at energy flow through photosynthesis to respiration is that the ultimate source of energy is the sun, right? Sun is the ultimate source of energy flow through most of the biological systems on Earth, with the exception of a few like the deep sea vents at the bottom of the ocean. But for pretty much everything that you and I are going to come in contact with, sun is the ultimate source of energy. So we've talked about energy flow through some of these systems at cellular level. Now let's look at it scaled up. So I'm going to skip this video. I'll talk about it in class, but the point is that the sun is the ultimate source of energy for the planet. And so the sun is generating radiant energy that travels from the sun to the earth, and it's a very long distance between those two bodies, and the light is moving very quickly. And so it only takes about 500 seconds for the light to reach the earth from the sun, or about 8 minutes and 20 seconds. So 8 minutes and 20 seconds, that's an average. Actually, it can vary from 490 seconds to 507 seconds due to changes in the orbit of the earth around the sun. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about some of the processes that can affect the orbit of the sun, thus affecting how much energy gets to the earth. And so, fair warning, this is not going to have a ton of biology in this lecture itself. But we need to do this to set up the rest of the term, because I talk a lot about how organisms interact with their environment. But the environment depends very much on how much energy is coming from the sun. So we do need to have some understanding of how variation in solar energy comes to be, and that leads us to these celestial processes. So the lectures won't all be about astronomy, but in this one case, we're going to talk a little bit about the Earth in context of some very large scale processes. So we're going to talk about the orbit of the Earth. And the orbit can be affected by three main cycles called the Milankovitch cycles. And so they were discovered by a Serbian researcher, and we're going to go through them here. So the first cycle is called eccentricity. So eccentricity is it's the deviation from a perfect circle. And so the orbit of the Earth around the sun can be very symmetrical and approximating a perfect circle, or it can be elongated into kind of an oval or an ellipse. And the changes between those two states can have an effect on how much solar energy reaches the Earth. Because if it's very elongated, there are points in that orbit that are either very close or very near to the sun. So the perihelion is the point of the orbit where the Earth is the closest to the sun, and the aphelion is the point of the orbit where it's farthest from the sun. So peri and aphelion. And if it's a elongated orbit, the difference between those 2 points is going to be pretty significant. But if the orbit is more of a circle, then there's not going to be as big a difference in how much energy gets to the Earth during those periods. So it can really have an effect on the different parts of the season. This is a slow-moving process that takes 100,000 years to go through a full cycle. But this is, only one of the changes of the orbit. And so if you look at it on a graph like this, you can see that the elongated orbit is definitely asymmetrical, and it can vary in the distance of the Earth between the Sun from 147 million kilometers to 152 million kilometers. And so the sunlight that hits the Earth in July, called the aphelion, is 7% less intense than in January, which is the perihelion. And that's a little curious. Why is the Earth warmer in the summer if it's actually the farthest away, right? It's 2.3 degrees warmer in the summer, yet it's farther away. So why is that? That's curious. Well, to understand that, you need to know the second process, which is called obliquity. And obliquity is the tilt of the Earth. So the Earth is on a 23-degree tilt, but actually that tilt of the Earth can vary between 22 and 24.5 degrees. This is another long cycle. It takes 41,000 years to go through that tilt cycle. But what that tilt can do is it can cause more extreme differences between summer and winter conditions of solar radiation. So if it's nearly straight up, there's not going to be much difference between summer and winter. But if the planet's really tilted, there's going to be a much larger difference in how much energy is being received by a point of the Earth between summer and winter. So if you put those together, you can see that the Earth is actually tilted towards or away from the sun at different points of its orbit. And so that can make a big difference. The sun itself is hitting during the summer at a more direct angle into the northern hemisphere. And since there's more land in the northern hemisphere, remember we were talking about that the other day, that means that the planet itself is going to be warmer. Whereas in the south, there's more water in the southern hemisphere. So if you go over to winter, now in the winter, the southern hemisphere is pointed towards the sun, but there's more water in the south. And so a lot of the water is just reflecting off the solar radiation. And so the north is absorbing more energy because there's more land. The south is reflecting more energy because it is water. So that's why in the summer, even though it's farther away, because it's pointed towards the sun, the Earth is actually warm. So it looks something like this. You've got that asymmetrical orbit, aphelion, perihelion, July, January. And in the north, we have summer in July because we are pointed and tilted towards that sun, even though we're farther away. And then in the perihelion, the southern hemisphere has its summer, we have our winter. Right? So this is a combination of eccentricity and obliquity. The last process is called precession. And precession is the axes of the Earth rotating around a point in the night sky. It's not changing the tilt angle. It's not changing it from 23.5 degrees. It's just changing where that tilt, where that axis is pointing. And so this can have an effect on changing when the seasons occur. Not necessarily the severity of the seasons, that's obliquity, but it can change the timing of the seasons. And so here's a little movie showing how the axis of the Earth is pointed towards Polaris right now. And so this is the night sky, and that's a star, Polaris. So we're pointed towards Polaris right now. But in 13,000 years, we'll be pointed towards Vega. And that's shown over here on the right. And this part here on the right, this is not for the exam. This is just for interest. As the axis of the Earth does this precession in a circle, it moves across different constellations in the night sky. And those constellations are sort of the basis of like astrology, right? And so right now we are in the constellation Pisces. That's what we're pointed towards, and we're about to move into the constellation Aquarius. Well, about to, meaning in the year 2597. But what I put up there is this old song, which I think is from like the 60s or something. And it's called The Age of Aquarius, and it's about moving into the Age of Aquarius, about moving into the future and stuff. So you can take a listen to that on your own. All right. But let's get back to what does precession mean for the Earth. So here, what we have on the very left hand of this infographic, you've got the axes of the Earth pointed towards Polaris in 2014, and then 13,000 years from now, we'll point towards Vega in 1514. Okay, so in 2014, we are pointed in the direction we are, and the summer solstice is in June, the winter solstice is in December, right? That's the way things are. In 13,000 years, we'll be pointed towards Vega, and so that should flip. We should have our winter during June, and we should have our summer during December. But that's not what's going to happen, and the reason it's not going to happen is because of our calendar. Our calendar, which was named after Pope Gregory, has leap years, and those leap years will keep us on track with this precession. And so even in 13,000 years, June will still be our summer solstice, and December will still be our winter solstice because of our calendar. So for humans, it won't be a big change. For other things on the planet, though, we will have flipped 180 degrees, and so it will flip when we have summer and winter. Okay. So the summary of all this is that if you take obliquity, eccentricity, precession, and you put them together, you have cycles that are predictable for each of those. They're happening over different time scales. But when you put them all together, you can actually predict the incoming solar radiation or insolation to the Earth. And that's what's in the green at the bottom. And the point that I want you to take home from this is that that green trace, while it's not random, it would be difficult to predict that, right? There's a lot of what appears to be you would have difficulty in predicting that. But if you know the processes, these three processes that are pretty simple, predictable, you can make predictions of what insolation patterns should um, result. And so, again, we're back to this pattern and process thing, and I think this is a really good example of that. That green trace is not something that is easily understandable, but when you break it down into its constituent parts, it starts to make sense. Okay, so I leave this up here for you to study from. This is just a summary of the three orbital cycles. And then over there on the right, I've got someone who looks like they got a tattoo of the Milankovitch cycles, which seems a little crazy. What I want to leave you here with is a little bit of information about, we know that the Milankovitch cycles affect solar radiation, but does it affect the temperature of the Earth, right? Can we make that leap? And so we need some special data for that. We need temperature data that goes back a very, very long time, right? Because some of those cycles were up to 100,000 years. So this is not easy data to get. How do you get temperature records going back? Well, you can get them from the ice cores, and we'll talk about those a little later. Ice cores in Antarctica and in Greenland. What I'm going to show you here today is data taken from Devil's Hole, Nevada. So this is a cave that is underground, and they're looking at the mineral deposits in these caves. And these mineral deposits can be radio dated fairly well, so we get dates. And you can also get little pockets in there of fluid that as they're being laid down, and so we can get samples of stable isotopes. And so in this case, it's an oxygen stable isotope that we're looking at. And oxygen comes in oxygen 16 and oxygen 18. Oxygen 18 indicates a warmer atmosphere. And so what we've got plotted here on this double y-axis plot is the Milankovitch cycle insolation in the purple hatched, and the Devil's Hole O18, which is a proxy for global temperatures. And they're pointing there in this graph to some correlation between the two. But if you look over the long data set, it matches in some places, but it does not match in a lot of others. So it's not really predictive of global temperatures. And that has not been solved, but it makes sense, I think, because there's a lot more that goes into global temperatures than just how much energy is incoming and hitting the Earth. And we'll talk about a lot of those processes next lecture. But you need a starting point, and the starting point is how much energy is hitting the Earth to begin with, right? So Milankovitch cycles help us predict that. So that's the starting point that we're at. Okay, that's it for today. I'll see you on Monday, and we'll go through some worksheets on the Milankovitch cycles. Okay, talk to you later.